23 years ago, in the quiet town of Willow Creek, a school bus vanished with an entire class of children, including Eleanor Vance's daughter, Chloe. No bodies, no answers, just an agonizing silence. For decades, the official story of a tragic accident offered no solace. But on a cold January morning in 2025, Eleanor discovered a grainy photograph from that fateful day. A tiny detail, easily missed, ignited a spark of terrifying suspicion. The school principal, Dr. Evelyn Reed, was in the background, engaged in a furtive, intense argument. It was a detail that shattered Eleanor's fragile peace and plunged her into a desperate quest for the truth. What really happened that day? And who was Dr. Reed trying to hide? Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are, and subscribe to our channel to receive new stories every day that will thrill your heart. I hope you enjoy the story. 23 years of empty days and sleepless nights. In the quiet, unassuming town of Willow Creek, Colorado, the calendar flipped to January 12, 2025, and for Eleanor Vance, the date tore at her soul as if it were the very first time. The crisp morning air, usually a balm, felt like a cold, sharp blade twisting in an old wound. It was on this precise date, back in 2002, that her bright-eyed daughter, Chloe, along with her entire fifth-grade class, had simply vanished during a school field trip. Disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the vast, unforgiving expanse of a remote nature preserve just outside town. No bodies, no definitive answers. Just a chilling, unsatisfying official explanation of a tragic accident, a collective delusion the authorities had peddled, implying the children had simply gotten lost and succumbed to the elements. But Eleanor had never, not for a single second, truly accepted it. Her daughter was too smart, too resourceful. The story was full of holes, gaping voids that swallowed any semblance of closure. For over 2 decades, that unresolved disappearance had festered, a gaping wound in her heart that stubbornly refused to heal. It wasn't a scar. It was an open, weeping sore that bled grief every single day. This grim anniversary, like all the others, began with a familiar ache in her chest, a phantom limb of sorrow. The muted light filtering through her kitchen window in her modest single-story house cast long, melancholic shadows across the familiar countertops. The coffee maker hissed, a solitary sound in the oppressive quiet. Eleanor moved with a practiced slowness, each gesture a testament to the weariness that had settled deep in her bones. Her fingers, once nimble and quick, now trembled slightly as she poured her coffee, the steam momentarily blurring her vision. Later that morning, as the clock on her mantelpiece inexorably ticked towards noon, a soft knock echoed through the silence. It was Mark Jefferson, Chloe's godfather and the father of Daniel, another child lost on that fateful day. Mark was one of the few people who still understood the raw, unyielding nature of Eleanor's grief. He entered, his own eyes mirroring a profound sadness that 23 years hadn't dulled. His hair, once dark, was now streaked with silver, and the lines around his eyes spoke volumes of shared pain. He carried a small, worn leather-bound photo album, their annual ritual already underway. They settled into Eleanor's cozy, if slightly faded, living room. The air was thick with unspoken memories, a silent pact of enduring sorrow. Mark, ever the steady presence, placed a comforting hand on Eleanor's arm. "Another year, Elle," he murmured, his voice raspy with emotion. "Still feels like yesterday." Eleanor nodded, tears welling in her eyes but refusing to fall. She'd cried enough tears to fill a lake. Today was about remembering, about holding on to the faint, flickering ember of hope, however irrational it seemed. They opened the album, its pages brittle with age, filled with snapshots of happier times. Chloe and Daniel as toddlers, giggling in a sandbox. Their first day of kindergarten, faces alight with anticipation. A shared birthday party, cake smeared across their joyful faces. Each image was a bittersweet reminder of the lives that had been stolen, the futures that never came to pass. They spoke softly, reminiscing about Chloe's infectious laugh, Daniel's quiet wisdom, the way the two children were inseparable. It was a mournful liturgy, a way to honor the vivid ghosts of their children. After a while, the album on the coffee table felt too heavy, too saturated with grief. Eleanor stood, needing to move, to disturb the stagnant air. She wandered towards a dusty bookshelf, where, tucked away behind old novels and forgotten trinkets, stood a small, unassuming cardboard box. It was marked simply, "Chloe's Things, 2002. She hadn't opened it in years, the memories too potent, too painful. But today, something compelled her. Perhaps it was the raw vulnerability of the anniversary or the quiet strength of Mark's presence. With trembling fingers, Eleanor lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst dried flower petals and a faded report card, was a stack of loose photographs. Most she recognized instantly. School plays, family vacations, candid shots from the backyard. But then her gaze snagged on one particular image, lying face down at the bottom. She picked it up, her breath catching in her throat. It was a granulated, slightly faded photograph taken on a disposable camera, likely by one of the chaperones. The last recorded moment of the class of 2002 before their fateful departure. The children were a blur of excitement, some waving, some impatiently waiting. The school bus, a bright yellow behemoth, loomed large in the background. It was a scene etched into her memory, replayed in her nightmares countless times. But this time, as her eyes scanned the familiar faces, a detail so subtle she almost missed it jumped out at her. In the far right corner of the frame, partially obscured by a tree branch, stood Dr. Evelyn Reed, the stern but respected principal of Willow Creek Elementary. This alone was odd. Eleanor vividly remembered being told that only the class teacher missed her. Lucas Miller and an administrative assistant were accompanying the children. Dr. Reed was supposedly tied up with a district meeting that morning. But it wasn't just her presence that sent a jolt of ice through Eleanor's veins. It was the expression on Dr. Reed's face. Her brow was furrowed in a deep, agitated frown, her lips thin, pressed together. Her left hand was raised, gesturing sharply, seemingly at the blurry figure of the bus driver. Her entire posture radiated an intense, furtive discussion, certainly not a warm, reassuring goodbye to excited children embarking on a field trip. Her eyes, usually calm and composed, held a glint of something akin to panic, or perhaps desperate urgency. A cold shiver snaked down Eleanor's spine, prickling her skin. Why was the principal, who wasn't supposed to be there, engaged in such a tense, hushed conversation with the bus driver? What were they arguing about? It wasn't a casual chat. It was a heated exchange, one that seemed carefully concealed from the children bustling nearby. The innocent scene, once a painful memory, now transformed into something sinister, replayed in her mind with a terrifying new context. The simple image, a forgotten relic from a time before the world shattered, exploded in Eleanor's mind like a bomb. It demolished the fragile facade of acceptance she had painstakingly built over 2 decades. The official narrative, that cold, unsatisfying explanation, crumbled to dust. This wasn't an accident. This was something else, something darker, something orchestrated. A dangerous, exhilarating flame of doubt and suspicion ignited within her, burning away years of weary resignation. Her hands, clutching the photo, began to tremble uncontrollably. Chloe's smiling face in the foreground seemed to accuse her, to demand answers. Was this tiny, overlooked detail, the furtive exchange, the hidden tension in the principal's eyes, the key to finally unlocking the truth? Or was it just another cruel mirage, a desperate mother clinging to a phantom hope, doomed to be swallowed by the despair that had consumed her for so long? Eleanor stared at the photo, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The quiet hum of the house suddenly drowned out by the thunderous questions echoing in her mind. She knew, with chilling certainty, that her long, agonizing wait for answers was about to take a terrifying new turn. The unsettling image of Dr. Evelyn Reed's agitated face, frozen in that 23-year-old photograph, became an insidious loop in Eleanor's mind. It replayed endlessly, a silent film strip of suspicion that stole her sleep and sharpened her senses. Every line on Reed's face, every tense angle of her body, screamed that something was profoundly wrong. Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that this overlooked detail wasn't just a coincidence. It was a key, meticulously hidden in plain sight for over 2 decades. Her first instinct was to go through official channels. She retrieved a faded, dog-eared business card from a forgotten corner of her desk drawer. Agent Davis, the FBI's lead investigator on the original case, now a name lost to retirement. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the well-worn number, the faint scent of dust and old paper clinging to the card. The first ring echoed in the quiet of her kitchen, a hollow sound. Then the second, the third. Until finally, the mechanical drone of a voicemail greeted her. She left a brief, urgent message, her voice tight with a desperate plea for him to call her back, to hear her out. She tried again an hour later, and then again. Each unanswered call, each mechanical chime of the voicemail felt like a deliberate slamming door. A wall of impenetrable silence seemed to rise between her and any hope of official assistance. Frustration, hot and bitter, began to churn in her stomach, mingling with the cold dread that had taken root since she found the photo. Was Davis simply retired and unreachable, or was there something more sinister at play, a deliberate silence surrounding the case? She felt a familiar despair creeping in, a weary acceptance that she was, once again, alone in her relentless pursuit. But this time, the despair was quickly overshadowed by a surge of raw, unyielding intuition. No, she wouldn't wait. Not anymore. 23 years had been long enough. A fierce, almost reckless determination hardened her resolve. She would go directly to the source. Willow Creek was a small town, its secrets often buried shallow. Eleanor knew Evelyn Reed's address by heart. The ex-principal, once a pillar of the community, had retreated into a life of near-total seclusion since the tragedy, her public appearances dwindling to almost none. Eleanor hadn't spoken to her in years, not beyond a brief, uncomfortable exchange at one of the early, chaotic parent meetings. The drive to Evelyn Reed's house felt unnervingly short, yet interminable. The familiar streets of Willow Creek, usually so comforting, now seemed to twist and stretch, each turn bringing her closer to a confrontation she both dreaded and craved. The Reed residence stood on a quiet cul-de-sac, a handsome, albeit slightly overgrown, 2-story house with a porch swing that looked untouched by human hand for years. As Eleanor pulled her modest sedan to the curb, a tension, almost palpable, seemed to hang in the crisp January air, a silent prelude to what was to come. She walked up the flagstone path, the crunch of her shoes against the gravel unnaturally loud in the suburban quiet. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and apprehension. She reached the porch, took a deep, steadying breath, and knocked. The sound resonated with surprising force against the solid oak door. A moment of silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then the door slowly, almost reluctantly, creaked open. Evelyn Reed stood in the doorway. Time had etched deeper lines into her once impassive face, and her usually meticulously styled silver hair seemed a little disheveled. Her eyes, behind thin spectacles, were wary, distant. A tight, almost forced semblance of politeness was plastered across her features, but beneath it, Eleanor could sense a flicker of something else, a deep-seated nervousness that betrayed her composed exterior. "Eleanor," Evelyn said, her voice a low, modulated tone, devoid of warmth. There was no surprise, only a strained recognition. "To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Eleanor didn't waste time on pleasantries. She held up the crumpled photograph, the image of Reed's agitated face a silent accusation. "I was looking through old photos, Dr. Reed. This one, it brought back some questions." Her voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "Why were you at the bus that day? The school said you had a meeting. And what were you discussing so intensely with the driver?" Evelyn's composure visibly fractured. Her eyes, usually so direct, darted away, flickering towards a partially open door deeper inside the house. Her hands clasped tightly in front of her, subtly tightened. "Eleanor," she began, her voice gaining an edge of impatience, "I assure you, there's nothing new to discover. That photo is old, likely taken before the official send-off. My memory ... It's hazy after so many years. I simply said goodbye to the children, as any principal would. The past should remain in the past, don't you think? It's healthier for us all." She tried to close the door slightly, a subtle but unmistakable gesture of dismissal. But Eleanor stood her ground, her gaze fixed on the principal's eyes. She pressed on, fueled by the conviction that she was finally onto something. "No, Dr. Reed, your expression, it wasn't a goodbye. It was an argument. A very serious one." "What were you arguing about?" As Eleanor spoke, her voice gaining a steely edge, a soft rustle came from behind the partially open door inside the house. Evelyn's eyes darted frantically towards it, a fleeting look of panic flashing across her face. Then, as if on cue, a young woman emerged from the shadows of the hallway. She was slender, with long, dark hair that fell over her face, almost completely obscuring her features. Her clothes were simple, unassuming, as if she was trying to blend into the background. The young woman didn't look at Evelyn, nor did she look at Eleanor. Her eyes were fixed rigidly on the floor as she moved with a hurried, almost furtive grace towards the front door. She pulled it open wider, a gust of cold air sweeping into the entryway, and slipped out onto the porch, her movements remarkably swift. She didn't pause, didn't turn back. She simply walked briskly down the path and disappeared around the corner of the street, vanishing as quickly as she had appeared. Eleanor's gaze followed her, a new wave of questions crashing over her. Who was that young woman? And why was she so desperate to avoid contact? Evelyn, seeing Eleanor's attention diverted, seized the opportunity. She cleared her throat, forcing a strained smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Eleanor," she said, her voice firmer, "I truly have nothing more to add. My apologies for not being able to provide the answers you seek. I hope you can find peace." With a decisive click, the door swung shut, leaving Eleanor standing alone on the porch, the cold wind suddenly biting at her exposed skin. Eleanor stood there for a long moment, the echoed thud of the closing door reverberating in the sudden silence. Her heart was hammering, a frantic, insistent rhythm. The image of the young woman's hasty departure, the principal's transparent nervousness, her evasiveness about the photo, it all clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Eleanor had never been more certain. Something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. This wasn't just old grief or a mother's delusion. This was real. A chilling conviction settled deep within her bones. She was tantalizingly close to something disturbing, something that had been meticulously buried for 23 long years. Was that young woman merely a houseguest, or was she a direct link to the past, a crucial piece in this agonizingly complex puzzle? The bitter cold of the January air seemed to sharpen Eleanor's focus, hardening her resolve. She had opened a door, and she knew, with an unwavering certainty, that she wouldn't close it until she found the truth. The encounter at Dr. Reed's house left Eleanor's mind reeling. The fleeting glimpse of the mysterious young woman, Evelyn's evasiveness, the unsettling sense of a carefully guarded secret, it all swirled together, a tempest of unanswered questions. Eleanor needed clarity, a place where the chaos in her mind could settle, even just for a moment. Her instincts pulled her towards the Willow Creek Cemetery. It was a familiar refuge, a place where, despite the profound sorrow, she often found a melancholic comfort amidst the neatly kept rows of headstones. The cemetery gates, usually a symbol of finality, beckoned to her. The air was colder here, carrying the faint, earthy scent of damp soil and lingering snow from the peaks of the distant Rockies. A simple, elegant memorial stood proudly at the heart of the children's section, a polished granite bench engraved with the names of the class of 2002, each name a silent echo in Eleanor's heart. She would often sit there, tracing Chloe's name with her fingertips, a silent conversation with the daughter she desperately missed. Today, however, the cemetery held a profound surprise. As Eleanor rounded a bend in the path, her gaze fell upon a solitary figure standing near the memorial. It was the same young woman she'd seen hurrying from Dr. Reed's house just moments earlier. Her back was to Eleanor, her slender frame hunched in quiet despair. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see her shoulders trembling, small, convulsive jerks that spoke of silent sobs. She wasn't just visiting. She was consumed by a grief that seemed both raw and deeply personal. Eleanor's heart, already a frantic drum against her ribs, quickened its pace. A powerful urgency surged through her, overriding any sense of social etiquette. She knew, with an unsettling certainty, that this was no coincidence. This woman was connected. Slowly, cautiously, Eleanor began to approach, her footsteps muffled by the soft, damp grass. "Excuse me," Eleanor called out softly, her voice a gentle inquiry, not wanting to startle her. The young woman flinched, her body tensing, before slowly turning around. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes, though swollen and red-rimmed, widened in a flash of surprise and then unmistakable fear. A flicker of recognition crossed her features as her gaze met Eleanor's, followed by a desperate attempt to wipe away her tears, as if trying to compose herself, to hide the raw emotion that had just poured out. Eleanor kept her voice low, compassionate, yet firm. "We meet again," she said, her eyes steady on the young woman's. "I believe I saw you leaving Dr. Evelyn Reed's house just a little while ago." The young woman's composure crumbled further. Her eyes darted away, her posture stiffening. She looked as though she wanted to bolt, to dissolve into the crisp January air, as if Eleanor's very presence was making her feel utterly exposed. Eleanor sensed her profound unease but pressed on, gently. "I'm sorry," she added quickly, her tone softening. "I don't mean to intrude, but I can't help but wonder. Who are you grieving for here? Were you related to one of the students who went missing 23 years ago?" The young woman's lips parted, then pressed together again, a struggle playing out on her face. For a long, agonizing moment, she seemed to weigh her response, her gaze fixed on the granite memorial, then a slow, almost imperceptible nod. A single reluctant nod. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. A fresh wave of emotions washed over her, a sliver of hope, a pang of shared grief, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. Her eyes drifted to the specific headstone the young woman had been facing. It was one of the many erected for the children whose bodies were never recovered, a poignant marker of absence. A blurred old photograph, encased in plastic, lay at its base. Eleanor could just make out the indistinct outline of a young girl's face. The young woman followed Eleanor's gaze, and as if realizing what Eleanor was looking at, she swiftly bent down and snatched up the photograph, clutching it tightly to her chest as if it were a fragile secret. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly, her voice filled with understanding, not accusation. "I truly didn't mean to invade your privacy. You must have loved and missed your sister very much. I understand that feeling." Eleanor took a small step back, preparing to leave, not wanting to cause the woman more distress. But just as Eleanor turned, the young woman's voice, a hesitant, fragile whisper, stopped her cold. "Wait," she said. Eleanor paused, turning fully to face her. The young woman's eyes, though still red, now held a new mixture of curiosity and something deeper, something cautious, almost calculating. "Why did you go to Principal Reed's house earlier?" The unexpected question caught Eleanor off guard. She studied the young woman's face, searching for a clue. There was more than just simple curiosity in her gaze. There was a guarded intensity, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. "I was just asking about the day of the school trip," Eleanor admitted, her voice steady. "I wanted to know if she was actually there when the students left or if she went with them." Reaching into her purse, Eleanor pulled out the slightly crinkled photograph she'd found. She held it out towards the young woman. "My friend Mark, he's over there." Eleanor gestured vaguely towards the other side of the cemetery, where Mark still stood by Daniel's memorial, a silent sentinel of sorrow. "He showed me this photo earlier. I'd never seen it before. It confused me. I didn't remember Principal Reed being there that day." The young woman stared at the picture, her grip tightening on her own framed photograph. Eleanor sighed, shaking her head slightly. Principal Reed. She insisted the picture was taken in the school parking lot before the trip, but Eleanor trailed off, unsure how to voice the nagging doubt that had taken root. The young woman's eyes lingered on the photograph, scanning the faces of the children, her expression shifting, a complex tapestry of emotions. Then a small, choked sound escaped her lips, a light chuckle, yet laced with an unbearable sorrow. But as her gaze landed on one particular face in the photo, tears welled up and slipped silently down her cheeks. The words came out in a hushed whisper, tinged with a bittersweet warmth that tugged at Eleanor's heart. "Chloe ... she was such a spitfire." Eleanor's ears perked up, a jolt of raw energy coursing through her. The mention of her daughter's name, spoken with such unexpected intimacy, pierced through her composure. "You knew Chloe?" Eleanor asked, unable to hide the urgency, the desperate hope in her voice. The young woman seemed startled, as if she hadn't expected Eleanor to catch her words. She quickly returned the class picture to Eleanor, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm Chloe's mother," Eleanor stated, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "Do you know something about Chloe?" The young woman froze. Her posture became suddenly defensive, almost coiled, as if Eleanor had cornered her. A wave of confusion washed over Eleanor as she noticed the young woman's eyes darting frantically towards the framed photograph she still clutched against her chest. Eleanor's gaze followed. The resemblance between the young woman and the little girl in the faded frame was striking. It sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine, a cold dread mixed with a surge of impossible hope. "Who are you?" Eleanor asked slowly, her tone measured, almost a whisper. "Are you ... this girl?" Eleanor pointed to the faded image in the frame, her heart racing a furious tempo. The young woman's response was immediate and vehement. "No," she almost shouted, her voice thick with panic, but the raw fear in her eyes suggested otherwise. It was a denial, desperate and unconvincing, as if she was trying to mask a deeper, terrifying truth. "It's okay," Eleanor said softly, taking a cautious step closer, her voice filled with a desperate plea for honesty. "You don't need to be scared. Are you ... one of the survivors? Are you this girl?" The young woman shook her head quickly, a frantic gesture, panic flashing in her eyes. "I think you're mistaken." "That's not me," she insisted, her voice trembling. But Eleanor could see the profound conflict in her gaze, the battle between fear and a desperate need to unburden herself. "No," Eleanor replied, her voice firm yet compassionate. "You know it is you. It's 100% you." The young woman's shoulders sagged, her resistance visibly crumbling. She looked utterly defeated. "You don't want to know who I am," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's better for everyone involved. Please. Please." Eleanor pleaded, desperation creeping into her words. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and sudden. "For all these years, I've never been able to understand my daughter's disappearance. It's been eating me alive. I come here every year to honor her, and after a few months, the pain in my heart eases. But then this day comes around, and it's like the devil's cycle, an endless torment on my soul." Tears streamed down her face as she stepped closer, her heart aching for answers. "If you know anything at all, please tell me." The young woman's eyes flickered, filled with a complex mix of fear, empathy, and a deep-seated weariness. Eleanor pressed on, her voice growing steadier, conviction ringing in her words. "Why were you at Principal Reed's house earlier? You can't be her daughter. I know Evelyn doesn't have a daughter." The question hung in the cold air, heavy with unspoken implications, a web of secrets and unspeakable truths. After a profound, heavy pause, the young woman finally relented, her voice barely above a whisper, raw with emotion. "You're right. I'm one of the missing students, a survivor." Eleanor's heart raced, disbelief washing over her in a tidal wave. "What?" she gasped, struggling to process the monumental weight of the words. Who? "My name is Sarah Collins," the young woman whispered. Recognition flooded over Eleanor. Sarah Collins. The name was etched into the granite memorial among the lost. A haunting reminder. "You were in my daughter's class," Eleanor murmured, trying desperately to keep her reaction in check, her mind racing to connect the fragmented pieces. "Did your family know you were alive?" Sarah shook her head, her expression heavy with pain. "No. That's why I come to the grave later in the day. My parents always come in the morning." Eleanor nodded, recalling the stoic, grief-stricken faces of the Collins, always at the cemetery at that same somber hour. "Why didn't you come back home?" Eleanor asked gently, not wanting to pry, yet unable to contain her overwhelming curiosity. "I'm too broken," Sarah replied, her voice trembling, haunted. "It's a long story." Eleanor's heart ached for the young woman before her, burdened by a past she couldn't escape, a trauma so profound it had kept her hidden for 2 decades. "You don't have to share it all with me," Eleanor said softly, a deep well of empathy opening within her. "But please, I'm begging you, turn yourself in to the police. Give them your testimony, your evidence. You could finally give us all answers." Sarah shook her head vehemently, a desperate, almost animalistic cry escaping her lips. No. Principal Reed said I'd only hurt everyone, dozens of families." Shock coursed through Eleanor at the mention of Dr. Reed. Evelyn Reed knew Sarah was alive all this time, and she discouraged her? Eleanor could hardly believe it. Why would she do that? "I trusted her." "I trusted her too," Sarah confessed, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face again. "She was the only one who understood my pain." Eleanor felt a surge of indignation, a fierce protectiveness rising. "Sarah, pain is living in the unknown. And we're all already in pain. It couldn't get any worse than this," she insisted, her voice raw with conviction. "But your testimony... it could help us. You would be saving us all, providing us closure, by revealing the truth." Sarah looked up, her eyes, filled with a desperate yearning for peace, searched Eleanor's for sincerity. Eleanor nodded fervently, her heart aching for both their lost children, for the decades of silent suffering. "Yes," Eleanor pleaded. you'd be helping every victim's family. Please, Sarah." After a prolonged, agonizing silence, the profound impact of Eleanor's words began to sink in. With shaking hands, Sarah took a deep breath, a decision forming in her tormented mind. "I think you're right," she said, her voice gaining strength, a fragile thread of hope weaving through her despair. "I've wrestled with this decision for a long time, but Evelyn always discouraged me, and I believe she had her reasons. But seeing you here, now, I'll call the police." As they waited for the officer to arrive, Eleanor's mind raced, a whirlwind of hope and terror. Desperation clawed at her throat. "Sarah, please," she whispered, leaning in, her voice barely audible. "Do you know where my daughter Chloe is?" Sarah's expression shifted to one of profound sadness. She nodded slowly, her gaze heavy with unspoken sorrow, her eyes filled with a fresh wave of tears. "What do you mean?" Eleanor pressed, her heart pounding in her chest, a terrifying premonition chilling her to the bone. "Where is she?" Just then, Mark Jefferson approached, his eyes scanning the area for Eleanor. The tension thickened as Sarah's fear intensified, the realization that another victim's family was near, filling her with dread. "Eleanor, what's going on?" Mark asked, looking between his friend and the stranger, confusion etched on his face. "Who is this?" Eleanor took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm her racing thoughts, preparing to deliver the monumental news. "Mark," she began, her voice trembling but resolute, "this is Sarah Collins. She was on the bus that day. She's alive." The revelation of Sarah Collins being alive, a living, breathing testament to a truth long buried, reverberated through Eleanor's mind with the force of an earthquake. It shattered the brittle glass of 23 years of agonizing conviction, replacing it with a terrifying, yet exhilarating, new reality. The initial shock at the cemetery had been overwhelming, a dizzying mix of disbelief and a desperate, fragile hope. But now, as the first rays of the morning sun pierced through the curtains of Eleanor's living room the following day, the true weight of Sarah's existence began to settle in. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, a silent hum of questions waiting to be answered. Mark Jefferson, still reeling from the bombshell news, sat opposite Eleanor and Sarah. His usually composed demeanor was fractured, his eyes wide with an incredulity that mirrored Eleanor's own. He had come to Eleanor's house with a mix of skepticism and a deep-seated desire to support his friend, but the sight of Sarah, undeniably older yet hauntingly familiar, had stripped away all doubt. Daniel's father, a man who had mourned a son lost forever, was now faced with the impossible, a survivor. His disbelief warred with a desperate, burgeoning hope. Sarah sat hunched on the edge of the sofa, a blanket draped around her shoulders, less for warmth than for comfort, a small barrier against the overwhelming reality she was about to face. Her long, dark hair, still damp from a quick shower Eleanor had insisted upon, clung to her face, partially obscuring her features. Her eyes, though still red-rimmed from tears shed at the cemetery, held a new, fragile determination. She gripped a mug of warm chamomile tea, its steam doing little to thaw the deep chill that had settled in her bones. She looked exhausted, like someone who had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders for far too long. "Are you ready, Sarah?" Eleanor asked softly, her voice filled with a tenderness that surprised even herself. The maternal instinct, dormant for so long, surged within her, intertwining with her relentless quest for truth. Sarah nodded, taking a shaky breath. "I have to be," she whispered, her voice a raw, raspy sound, as if her vocal cords hadn't been used for anything but whispers for years. "It's time." And so, the fragmented, horrifying tapestry of Sarah's story began to unfurl. She started with the morning of January 12, 2002, a day that had been etched into her memory with the sharpest of knives. The excitement of the field trip, the innocent chatter of her classmates, Chloe's infectious giggles from the seat behind her. But then, the atmosphere had shifted. Sarah confirmed Eleanor's chilling suspicion. The excursion wasn't an innocent adventure. It was a meticulously crafted deception. Dr. Evelyn Reed? She was deeply involved, Sarah whispered, her gaze distant, fixed on a point only she could see. Not just that argument with the driver. She orchestrated it all. Eleanor's breath hitched. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. Orchestrated what, Sarah? She urged, leaning forward, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah's eyes, haunted and weary, met Eleanor's. It wasn't an accident, Eleanor, she said, her voice dropping to a guttural whisper, thick with trauma and suppressed terror. It was a trap. The principal ... she delivered us. The words hung in the air, a grotesque echo that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. Eleanor felt a sickening lurch in her gut, a wave of nausea washing over her. Delivered them. Like packages. Like livestock. Mark, across from them, gasped, his face paling to an ashen gray. He instinctively reached for Eleanor's hand, his grip tight and desperate. Sarah then recounted the chilling details she had pieced together over years of reliving the nightmare. Dr. Reed, the esteemed principal, had been under immense financial pressure. She had accumulated crippling debts, not just typical bills, but money owed to truly dangerous people, loan sharks who operated in the shadows, their threats chillingly real. Her family, Sarah revealed, was being threatened. And so, in a desperate, monstrous act of self-preservation, Evelyn Reed made a macabre deal. She used the field trip as a cover, Sarah explained, her voice gaining a detached, almost clinical tone, as if speaking about someone else's nightmare. She made an agreement with them to deliver us to a network, an international network of human and organ traffickers. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Her vision blurred, her ears roared with the sheer, unspeakable horror of it. Trafficking, not just kidnapping. Not just lost, but sold. Her Chloe, her innocent, beautiful Chloe. For profit. The air in the room seemed to grow thin, suffocating. Mark swore under his breath, a guttural sound of disbelief and rage. Sarah continued, painting a picture that was darker than anything Eleanor had ever dared to imagine in her darkest nightmares. The bus driver, Lucas Miller, the man everyone in town had believed was either a complicit monster or another victim of the supposed accident, was in fact neither. He wasn't part of it, Sarah whispered, a flicker of something akin to pity in her eyes. He tried to resist. He tried to stop them. He screamed. Eleanor felt a sickening wave of understanding. Lucas Miller. The quiet, kind-eyed man who had driven her Chloe to school every day. He wasn't a conspirator. He was a victim, just like the children. They overwhelmed him, Sarah went on, her voice trembling now. They tied him up. He fought, Eleanor. He fought for us. His reputation, Eleanor realized with a fresh pang of despair, had been meticulously shredded by the official story, making him a convenient scapegoat, a loose end tidily tied up by the orchestrators of this horror. He was either silenced or killed, Sarah concluded, her voice barely audible. To make sure no one questioned the accident, Eleanor pressed her palms against her temples, trying to ward off the dizzying surge of revulsion and grief. The image of gentle Lucas Miller, fighting for the children, then being silenced ... It was almost too much to bear. What did they do with Lucas? She whispered, her voice hoarse, raw with emotion. And the other children? Where are the other children, Sarah? My Chloe? Every word from Sarah was a piece of this agonizing puzzle, slotting into place with brutal precision. Each new detail didn't just illuminate the past. It twisted the knife of her grief, carving out a deeper, more agonizing wound. The hope she had felt at the cemetery, fragile as it was, now mingled with a bone-chilling terror. The monster wasn't a random event, a cruel twist of fate. It was a calculated, heinous crime, meticulously planned, executed by someone they trusted. The truth, as it unfolded before her, was infinitely more sinister, more soul-crushing than any nightmare she had ever conjured. It was a terror so profound, it threatened to swallow the fragile hope she had just rediscovered whole. The air in Eleanor's living room, still heavy from Sarah's earlier revelations, grew impossibly dense as Sarah braced herself to reveal the darkest chapter of her nightmare. Eleanor and Mark sat frozen, their faces pale, their breaths shallow, braced for the next unspeakable truth. They held each other's hands, their knuckles white, an unspoken pact to face whatever horror was about to unfold. The bus! It didn't go to the nature preserve, Sarah began, her voice a thin, reedy whisper, her eyes fixed on some distant, invisible point beyond the sunlit window. We drove for hours, not on the usual roads. Dirt tracks, through desolate, empty landscapes. We were scared. Some kids cried. Mr. Miller. He was tied up, groaning in the back. We knew then. We just knew something was terribly wrong. She described the terrifying journey, the increasing fear in the bus as the familiar Colorado landscape gave way to parched, rugged terrain, unmistakably leading south towards the border. The bus finally lurched to a halt in the dead of night in a place that felt utterly isolated, miles from any civilization. It was just a dusty, abandoned shack, Sarah recounted, a shiver running through her. In the middle of nowhere, near the border with Mexico. That shack, she explained, was merely a holding pen. The children, disoriented and terrified, were roughly herded out of the bus, their innocent voices silenced by the sheer terror of the unknown. They separated us, Sarah's voice cracked, tears finally overflowing and tracing paths down her dust-stained cheeks. Brutally. Girls one way, boys another. The younger ones were screaming for their parents. Older kids like me, ... We just clung to each other, trying to be brave, but we were just as terrified. Her voice broke completely as she recalled the fate of her classmates, the fragmented, nightmarish images seared into her memory. The scene at that desolate shack, illuminated only by the harsh glare of a single, flickering lantern, played out like a macabre tableau. She remembered seeing small groups of children, her friends, her classmates, being led away by shadowy figures, shoved into different vehicles, unmarked vans, dusty trucks. Most of the children, Sarah whispered, her voice raw with grief and shame, including boys and girls ... they were sold. Sold to international trafficking networks. Her words hung in the air, a chilling indictment of human depravity. Eleanor felt a cold, paralyzing dread seep into her bones. Sold, like cattle. Not just missing, not dead, but commodities. The thought was a grotesque distortion of everything she knew about human life. Sarah continued, her voice gaining a haunting, detached quality, as if recounting a story that couldn't possibly be real. Some for organ trafficking. They were just ... bodies, pieces, others for forced labor. Children forced into mines, into factories, into fields, in countries I couldn't even name. And the girls, the older ones, for exploitation. The details were vague, mercifully, but the implication was clear. A horrifying tapestry of suffering that stretched across continents. Their innocent lives consumed by the dark underbelly of the world. Then, Sarah's gaze, which had been distant, snapped back to Eleanor's, a look of profound sorrow clouding her eyes. The worst part, she began, her voice barely audible, came when they separated us for the final time. I remember seeing Chloe. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a cry. Mark's grip on her hand tightened, his breathing shallow. Chloe? Eleanor choked out, a raw, primal fear seizing her. Yes, Sarah whispered, a single tear escaping and tracing a slow path down her cheek. And Daniel too, Mark. They were together, clinging to each other. They were so scared. I saw them being pushed into different vehicles. Chloe into one, Daniel into another. They were screaming each other's names. They were calling for you, Eleanor, for you, Mark. Eleanor felt a sickening wave of nausea, her stomach twisting into knots. She could almost hear Chloe's panicked cries, see her daughter's terrified face, stretching out a desperate hand. Mark let out a low, guttural sound, a strangled sob that was quickly swallowed. I can't confirm their deaths, Sarah admitted, her voice trembling, laced with an agonizing regret. I wish I could. I wish I could give you that ... any peace. But what I witnessed before we were separated, the way the traffickers treated us ... they didn't care about our lives. Not really. We were just cargo, goods to be delivered. Her words implied a chilling indifference to the children's welfare, a cold, calculating ruthlessness that suggested survival was a fortunate anomaly, not an expectation. The sheer inhumanity of it all was overwhelming. A wave of profound guilt washed over Sarah. She had survived. She had escaped after years of unimaginable captivity and exploitation. Her voice broke again. I carried this secret, this terrible truth ... for so long. It corroded me from the inside. Living under the burden of it, the trauma. It was a prison all its own. She spoke of the years of terror, the desperate longing for freedom, the eventual, harrowing escape that had left her physically scarred and mentally shattered. When she finally made contact with Dr. Evelyn Reed years later, broken and adrift, the ex-principal had offered her shelter, a new identity, and financial support. But it came with a terrible price: silence. Dr. Reed argued that the truth was too horrible, Sarah explained, tears streaming down her face now, unheeded. She said the families wouldn't be able to bear it, that it would only add to their suffering. But as Eleanor and Mark sat there, listening to the agonizing details of this monstrous crime, a pain unlike any they had known before settled deep within them. It transcended the decades of grief, the gnawing uncertainty. This was the pain of raw, unvarnished truth. It was the crushing weight of knowing the unspeakable suffering their children and so many others had endured. The knowledge was a fresh wound, but paradoxically, it also brought a terrible, stark clarity. The fog of the unknown had finally lifted, replaced by a horrifying, undeniable reality. And though it was a truth steeped in profound sorrow, it was, at last, the truth. The confession spilled from Sarah Collins' lips was not just a story. It was a meticulously detailed roadmap to a horror long suppressed. Her words, though fragmented by trauma, wove a horrifying tapestry of abduction, exploitation, and calculated betrayal. Eleanor, her heart a raw, exposed nerve, had managed to discreetly record Sarah's entire harrowing account on her phone. Every choked whisper, every agonizing detail of the children's fate, every accusation against Dr. Evelyn Reed, it was all captured, irrefutable evidence. There was no time for hesitation. Eleanor and Mark, their faces etched with a grim, shared resolve, drove immediately to the nearest FBI field office. The fluorescent lights of the waiting area felt harsh, alien, after the intimate darkness of Sarah's confession. Eleanor clutched her phone like a lifeline, the weight of the recorded truth heavy in her hand. When they finally met with the duty agent, a young woman with sharp, inquisitive eyes, Eleanor wasted no time. She explained, with a chilling calmness that belied the storm raging within her, that she had a survivor from the 2002 Willow Creek school trip. She pressed play on her phone, allowing Sarah's trembling voice to fill the sterile room. The transformation in the agent's demeanor was instant. Disbelief gave way to a hardened, focused intensity. Within minutes, Agent Davis was on the phone. He answered this time, his voice initially laced with a weary skepticism that quickly evaporated as Eleanor's urgent, clipped sentences cut through his retirement calm. He arrived at the field office an hour later, his face pale, his usually crisp suit slightly rumpled. The years had added silver to his temples and a deeper weariness to his eyes, but the moment he saw Sarah, a flicker of something long dormant ignited within them. He sat across from Sarah in a quiet interview room, just the three of them. Eleanor watched, her breath hitched in her throat, as Sarah, guided by Davis's gentle but persistent questioning, recounted her story again. This time there was a solemnity, a grim weight in Davis's posture. As Sarah described the hidden conversations, the secluded shack, the different vehicles, the chilling realization dawned on him. The weight of 23 years of unresolved frustration and nagging loose ends finally materialized in his gaze. He knew. He had always suspected there was more to the Willow Creek case, a dark current beneath the placid surface of the official report. Now the dam had broken. "We're reopening it," he stated, his voice quiet but firm, a promise hanging in the air. Immediately. The arrest of Dr. Evelyn Reed was swift, almost surgical. An FBI tactical team, moving with an efficiency honed by years of silent vigilance, descended upon her secluded home just hours after Sarah's testimony. Eleanor didn't witness the actual arrest, but she imagined the scene. The quiet, dignified facade of the former principal crumbling under the weight of flashing lights and stern, unyielding faces. Reed was brought into the same FBI field office. Eleanor and Mark, waiting anxiously in an adjacent observation room, watched through a two-way mirror as the interrogation began. Evelyn, initially composed, almost defiant, sat across from Agent Davis. She tried to deflect, to deny, to cling to her carefully constructed narrative of innocence. But Davis, armed with Sarah's raw, living testimony and the meticulously unearthed evidence Eleanor had unwittingly provided, was relentless. He laid out the photo, the details of the bus route deviation, the timeline that contradicted her initial statements. Then, Sarah's recorded voice was played. The sound of her choked whispers describing the horror, the separation, the words, "She delivered us," echoed through the interrogation room. That was the breaking point. Evelyn's carefully maintained composure finally shattered. Her eyes widened, filled with a mixture of terror and resignation. She slumped forward, her shoulders shaking, and then she confessed. The words tumbled out, punctuated by ragged sobs. Evelyn admitted to everything. Yes, she had been coerced. Not by some abstract threat, but by a powerful, ruthless criminal organization, shadowy figures who had threatened her family, her very existence. They had found her when she was drowning in insurmountable debts, seizing upon her vulnerability. In exchange for her family's safety and a promised cut of their monstrous profits, she had agreed to facilitate the kidnapping of the entire class, using the innocuous field trip as a perfectly crafted facade. The school bus, the remote location, it was all part of their heinous plan. "Lucas Miller," Evelyn choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "He tried to stop them. He fought. He truly did. But they overpowered him. He became a liability. An inconvenient witness." She confirmed what Sarah had suspected. The kind, gentle teacher, once unfairly maligned, had been nothing more than a victim. He was murdered or silenced permanently to ensure the seamless execution of their plan and to maintain the fabricated narrative of an accident. His reputation, deliberately sullied, had been their final, cruel act to guarantee that no one would ever look too closely. The news of Dr. Reed's arrest and her chilling confession ripped through the quiet town of Willow Creek like a wildfire, igniting shockwaves that extended far beyond its borders. The FBI office, usually a bastion of quiet bureaucracy, transformed into a hub of frenetic activity. Agents moved with a renewed sense of purpose, their voices rising in urgency. With Evelyn's confession and Sarah's invaluable insights, the pieces of the puzzle began to snap into place at an alarming rate. Names emerged, connections were drawn, and the vast, sinister web of the trafficking network began to reveal its horrifying extent. There was a palpable sense of both horror and a grim triumph in the air. The long-dormant case, once a symbol of impenetrable mystery, was now fully, unequivocally alive. Sarah Collins, the courageous survivor, was immediately placed under witness protection. Her bravery had become the vital pillar upon which this long-awaited justice would be built. Eleanor, Mark, and Agent Davis exchanged glances, a shared understanding passing between them. After 23 years, the impenetrable ice that had encased the truth was finally, undeniably, cracking. The pain was still immense, a raw, aching wound, but it was no longer the pain of the unknown. It was the pain of a truth revealed, a truth that, for the first time, offered the terrifying, yet liberating, possibility of justice. The hunt was on. The fluorescent hum of the FBI field office faded into the background as Eleanor, Mark, and Sarah finally stepped out into the crisp January evening. The sky overhead was a canvas of bruised purples and fiery oranges, the setting sun casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt parking lot. A profound silence fell between them, broken only by the distant murmur of city traffic and the occasional shriek of a seagull. The air, though still bearing the bite of winter, felt inexplicably lighter, cleaner, as if a suffocating weight had been lifted from the very atmosphere. They stood for a moment, simply breathing, the collective sigh of 23 years of holding their breath. The raw, gut-wrenching pain of losing Chloe and Daniel remained, a constant, dull ache that Eleanor knew would never fully disappear. It was a phantom limb of sorrow, a part of her that would forever be missing. But now, this pervasive grief was no longer the all-consuming darkness it once was. It was accompanied by something new, something unexpected, a profound and unwavering sense of purpose. They had the truth. A horrifying, agonizing truth, yes, but a truth nonetheless. Mark, his face pale but resolute, finally broke the silence, his voice thick with emotion, barely above a whisper. "What do we do now?" he asked, his gaze fixed on the fading horizon, his shoulders slumping slightly with the weight of the day's revelations. The question hung in the air, echoing the uncertainty of the uncharted path before them. Eleanor turned to Sarah, who stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself. Sarah's eyes, though still heavy with the indelible marks of trauma, held a fragile, nascent spark of hope, a light Eleanor hadn't seen in them, perhaps for decades. It was a tentative flicker, born from the courage she'd found to speak, a silent testament to the beginning of her own healing. A fierce resolve hardened Eleanor's jaw. She looked from Sarah to Mark, her gaze unwavering. "Now," Eleanor stated, her voice steady and clear, imbued with a newfound strength, "we make sure justice is done. For Chloe, for Daniel, for every single child who lost their lives and their innocence that day." Her words were not just a promise. They were a vow etched into the very core of her being. Just then, Agent Davis emerged from the double doors of the FBI building, his footsteps echoing on the concrete. He approached them, his expression grim but determined. "The case will be fully reopened," he confirmed, his voice professional, yet tinged with a deep personal commitment. "It's now a federal investigation with full resources dedicated to dismantling this entire network." He looked directly at Sarah. "Your testimony, Ms. Collins, is invaluable. It's the linchpin that finally broke this open." Eleanor felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The wheels of justice, dormant for so long, were finally grinding into motion. "And the other families?" Eleanor asked, her voice tight with a desperate longing for shared understanding. They deserve to know. Davis nodded. We're working to contact them now. It's going to be difficult, reopening these wounds, but they deserve the truth, no matter how painful. Sarah, visibly exhausted from the ordeal of dredging up decades of suppressed horror, leaned against the rough brick wall of the building. Her face was pale and drawn, but there was a subtle, almost imperceptible lightness to her posture now, as if a crushing weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Eleanor walked over to her, her maternal instincts fully engaged. Without a word, she wrapped Sarah in a gentle embrace. Mark joined them, his arms circling both women, forming a silent, protective huddle. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion, her face buried in Eleanor's shoulder. "For believing me, for helping me find the courage to come forward." "Thank you," Eleanor whispered back, tears finally blurring her vision, "for telling the truth. You've given us all a chance at something we thought was lost forever. Closure." As they pulled away, Eleanor looked at Mark, then at Sarah. The road to justice would be long and arduous, undoubtedly fraught with more painful revelations. There would be investigations spanning continents, courtroom battles, and the relentless pursuit of those who had profited from unimaginable suffering. But for Eleanor, the 23 years of agonizing uncertainty had finally, irrevocably, come to an end. The void in her heart would always remain, a testament to her lost daughter, but now it was no longer an empty echo chamber of despair. It was filled with a fierce, burning resolve. "What now, Eleanor?" Mark asked again, his voice softer, but with a new undercurrent of shared purpose. Eleanor took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, a symbolic cleansing. She looked up at the first stars beginning to pepper the darkening sky, tiny pinpricks of light in the vast expanse. "Now," she said, her voice steady and determined, echoing with the strength of a mother's unbreakable will, "we honor our children's memory by making sure justice is served. And we help Sarah build a new life, the life she was denied for so long." As they made their way to Eleanor's car, the quiet hum of the city seemed to merge with the newfound purpose in Eleanor's heart. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but alongside it now was a burning determination to see this through to the very end. For Chloe, for Daniel, for Lucas Miller, for all the children lost that day, and for Sarah, who had miraculously survived against all odds. Eleanor silently vowed to keep fighting, relentlessly, until the full truth was known and every single person responsible was held accountable. The road ahead would be long and undoubtedly painful, but for the first time in 23 years, Eleanor Vance felt like she was finally on the path to answers, and perhaps, eventually, to a kind of peace she had thought forever out of reach. We want to hear your opinion about this thrilling story. What do you think will happen with them? Tell us your name, where you are watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the new stories coming up. See you next time.